Remember, I do the research. Somebody had a bad day, huh? Of course, usually they're all covered with blood and stain. You know, I usually don't see coroners with tactical bulletproof. Now we're getting cool here. Well, I love to start my day with an ambush. It's harder than it looks.
Hi, I'm Harlan Coben. I write books, and I am excited today to be with my good friend Patricia Cornwell as we're going to start talking about her career and everything else that we want to learn about her, and her big new book, which I have a copy of right here. Doesn't it look nice, Patricia? Don't you like that? Do you like that cover?
It looks good, especially looks good when you holding it up and with that NASA shirt on.
There it is, NASA.
If I put that on the cover, I'd sell a whole lot more copies.
But you know, first of all, the NASA thing, part of the book, which we'll talk about a little bit, but if I may quickly brag, my son, who's graduating from Rice University in May, will be working in flight control at NASA.
That is fantastic.
So I'm ridiculously proud, and so I have tons of swag.
You know, that's I'm very familiar because I've been over to Johnson Space Center a number of times, and you should be proud. That's a big deal.
Yeah, he was working an internship where he graduated in 5 years instead of 4 years, and he worked a full year at NASA at Johnson Space Center, and of course loved it. And now they offered him a job. So Dad is thrilled, though he'll be in Houston, not New Jersey. Where are you right now, Patricia? Where are you doing this from?
Boston, not too terribly far from where you are.
Yeah, not too bad. Now I have to read a little bit of a bio, though. Why, I don't know. You all know who I am talking to. But just a few facts on Patricia Cornwell's career. We have over 150 million books sold, translated into 36 languages, available in more than 120 countries, 29 New York Times bestsellers, which is really impressive because she's only written 28 books. No, I'm kidding. 29, every one of her books, of course, jumps right to number one. I have no doubt that this one is going to do the same. And what's so exciting, we'll go into some other stuff as we're talking about the TV news, what's going on with that, how the career started. But this is a Scarpetta novel. And that's kind of where I wouldn't mind starting with you a little bit. You first started with Scarpetta when you wrote Postmortem in 1990, and not to be too corny or all that kind of stuff, but I think it really, as much as any book over those last 30 years now, over 30 years,
crazy,
changed the landscape of thrillers and what female characters could do. Do you want to start with how you kind of began with Scarpetta?
I would love to, because, you know, you have to, it's a weird how it's circled around. That's one of the reasons I have the title Autopsy, which is a little bit of a play on Postmortem, because when you deal with the morgue, you either refer to a case as a postmortem or post, or an autopsy. So these are like the two bookends on my career. You know, although when I stopped writing Scarpetta 5 years ago, I honestly did not think I was coming back to it. But I started out as a journalist. And, you know, I wanted to write books, but I knew nobody was going to just hire me to write books after college. So I went into journalism, ended up with the police beat. This is how I got interested in crime, and it's also started my method of basically reporting on things. I have to go out and try to see things for myself. Maybe might be a failing on my part that's so necessary, but it's what I've always done. And that landed me in getting a little tour of the morgue in Richmond, Virginia, in 1984, before a lot of people listening to this were even born, probably. And I met a woman medical examiner, and she was telling me what they do, because way back then, this was not a world that people knew about. Right. And when I was a cop reporter, the detectives would come see you, and you'd walk past them, and they smell horrible because they've been in the morgue, but they'd never, you never went in there, and I never talked to a medical examiner. It was a very secret sort of thing. So when I finally got a tour and started finding it out, I was trying to write crime novels, and I created this medical examiner, and one book, and then another book, and then another book, all getting rejected. And finally it was suggested, your coolest character is this woman medical examiner. Why don't you make her the main character? I was an editor at the Mysterious Press who said that after she'd rejected my first 3 books. And so that's what I tried to do, and that became Postmortem. And I think one of the reasons I believe that book is especially powerful is when I was working on it, I was still working in the medical examiner's office, and we were in the throes of these horrific serial murders that were going on in the city. It was like about 5 women, and everybody was terrorized, including people in the office where I worked. I mean, nobody knew who was doing this. And that's when I started wondering, if Scarpetta were the medical examiner in this situation, what would she do? And what would it be like for her? And that was how that book started. And to go back to your original point, Harlan, it wasn't greeted with a great deal of enthusiasm early on. People said nobody wants to read this graphic sort of stuff, and a woman shouldn't be in a morgue cutting up dead bodies. And then the big thing was this type of thriller begins to veer away from what's a little more traditional, which works for a reason. People like to know, oh, I knew it was that guy doing it all along. It's a little harder in the big, scary world of violent psychopathy, where oftentimes you really do not know who's doing it. And so it was a new thing, but what it did do for TV, which you've had much more success with than I have so far, is it made it accessible. It made the world of forensic science and medicine much more open for other people to use it and come up with cool things that they can do with it too.
Well, I don't remember before Postmortem, I don't remember ever really, other than the quick autopsy scene, I mean, the TV show Quincy maybe, but really, I think you opened up a whole new avenue. You opened up a big door, let's put it this way, that a lot of people have walked through after you. Would you not say?
I think so. And I think I was in the right place at the right time is a really big part of it, because that infamous tour of the morgue in 1984, I said, what's new? What's next? I mean, we all know they do these dissections, but she said, well, there's this thing called lasers, what we're going to start using to see things on the body that you might not find otherwise. And I said, ooh, that sounds kind of cool. And also there's this thing called DNA, which is going to help with identification. And I thought, wow, I think I want to learn more about all this. The science part of it, once you realize that forensics simply means taking anything and applying it to law. So forensic science, for example, is just the kind of science that you had in grade school that I bet you were better at than I was, Harlan. But everything, yeah, I mean, I was intrigued at taking something like a microscope or various chemical tests, and that it might tell you what really happened to this person. It's a lot like an archaeology dig, if you think about it. You take all these pieces and parts and try to reconstruct how a civilization lived and also how it died.
How much is Scarpetta? Let's go right back to the creation of Scarpetta. So how much was Scarpetta you? I mean, when you were creating Scarpetta, do you look at her as an alter ego? Do you look at her as somebody completely different? Do you notice things you have in common with her?
I do have things in common with her, but I really do look at her as somebody different. And I think that's why I got tired of writing the books, and that's why I quit 5 years ago. And I just thought, I'm not sure. She and I both had enough, seriously. But I've never gotten tired of her. And if I really thought of her as me, not only would I get tired of her, being in the same room with her, especially all these years, but I look up to her. I know enough to be able to channel that character and figure out what she would do. And I have to be very research heavy because I'm writing about somebody that does stuff that I don't do for a living and is technical, just like your son with NASA. I mean, it's a whole different world when you're dealing with that sort of thing. But so I don't think of her as me, but I sort of channel through her. It must be a little bit like being a parent and having a kid. You got the DNA and you go, oh, that sounded just like you, the wife says. But still, you're talking about a very separate entity.
Right. Well, I want to get into a little bit of your creative process. I'm always fascinated. If you ask 10 writers how they do it, you usually get 11 different answers. So I know we'll do that, but I always find it interesting. So let's start with the seed. If you want to choose autopsy or postmortem, either book. Let's start with you're starting that book. What are you doing first? What's the first thing you do? You get an idea? Do you start with the character? Do you start looking at this at your research? Do you research before you start? Give us a little bit of how put the seed in the ground that's going to grow into the book.
Okay, I will start with autopsy, since that's the most recent time that I dealt with this, and it was harder because I had stopped Scarpetta 5 years ago and had not thought of her really since, in terms of thinking of a story. I was busy doing space thrillers and other things, and I was deliberately away from that. So then the pandemic hit, and I had a little more time on my hands, and also you're holed up and you're wondering if the planet's coming to an end and everything else. And I started thinking about her, and I wondered, what would it be like if she were dealing with this world? And so, and where would she be, and what would I do with her? Because I might be home for a while. Should I think about this a little bit? And as what I always do is I try to figure out where she is. It always starts with her. It does not start with the technology. There's an overall, like back in the old days, I'd say, you know what, let me show people forensic fire investigation, or I'm going to show them how you could weaponize, a virus like, smallpox and unnatural exposure that I wrote, or whatever. But it's always when I'm going to start that deadly deed of that blank screen, page 1, and you know what that's like better than anybody. It's like, what comes to my mind is like, where is she? And in autopsy, and just so you know, I don't always get it right at first. Sometimes I have a scene with her, and I had one scene, you'll laugh at this, I had a scene where it opened within her office, and she was lying on her floor, taking a time out. And I kept saying, it just went on for a month. And it was at a time when our bulldog that we had back then was not well and was the end stages of something. And I would go trying to work and then go, and it was just a horrible time. And she would not get off the floor. And finally, I realized she just wasn't ready to talk to me right then. I wasn't ready to do it. So sometimes it is funny how that happens. But in autopsy, where I finally did realize where she was, I was seeing her in Northern Virginia in a state office building, a corner suite. She's like on a 3rd or 4th floor, and she's looking down at her parking lot as the storm is moving in, and leaves are blowing around. The street lights are blinking on because it's wintertime and it's getting dark. And she's looking at these people going out to her cars a little bit too early for her taste, okay? And she's realizing, not only does nobody really know her anymore, because she was in Virginia and she came back after many, many years. She's only been there a couple months now. Not only do they not necessarily know her, but those who do don't really want her back. Because once she appears, it's a new sheriff in town. It always is. And you get this sense of somebody who's against a lot of odds, a secretary she inherited who is nothing but a foe, and all these fiefdoms that have formed over the decades that have run the medical examiner system into the ground. And so that's what I saw. And then I knew, well, there'd have to be somebody in the refrigerator that's bothering her a lot right now. So that's sort of how that all began. Let me ask you that question. How do you start your book?
I usually start with I usually start with an idea. I usually start with a what if. So in the case of my breakout book was Tell No One. So in the case of Tell No One, I was thinking about, well, what if a man, I was watching one of those bad romance movies on TV. And there's ones that always had like a man and woman are together and the wife gets murdered and the man can't move on with his life. And then he sees a hot babe and all of a sudden he's fine and he immediately moves on with his life. So I was thinking, what about the guy who can't go on? What about the man who really lost his soulmate? Can I find redemption from there? And from there, I came with an idea of a man whose wife is murdered. 8 years pass, he can't get over her death, and then he gets an email. He clicks a hyperlink. A webcam pops up, and a dead man walks by. His dead wife walks by, so she's still alive. How can that be? And then I start going. So usually I start with a scenario, and then I ask myself, who will tell the story? And when it's time for, you have Case Scarpetta, and I got Myron Bolitar. Who will tell that story? Sometimes it's Myron, not often, once every 5 or 6 years. Which is why I'm fascinated by the fact that you decided to bring her back to Virginia, and you decided to put all these roadblocks in her way before there's any kind of really crime. So did you just want to mess with her, or you just thought that would be something that the characters could overcome?
She would tell you that I always mess with her. Well, believe it or not, look, here's the funny thing. When I first was getting started, and I remember going to my first murder mystery convention, and they were talking about red herrings and buried clues and all the conventions of the genre. And I'm coming out of working in the morgue, and I very wrongly sort of went, well, poo-poo, that's silly. That's not, a body on a table is not a mystery. It's a real person. And, I was very much on my little forensic high horse back in the day because I was surrounded by the reality of it all the time. And I took things a little bit too seriously, including myself. Here's the interesting thing. All of these things that they talk about are part of basically an algorithm that makes a formula, and they're reasons for formulas. When you call it, the way you just described, you know, boop, 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 like a computer program, what you're going to do. You've got the critical thinking outlining all of that, the what if, which is in its own way very mathematical, because a mystery, a thriller, nothing is any good if it's not logical. And whether it's the Harlan Coben way to do it or the way I do it, which is research and what's Scarpetta doing and sort of working through her, walking in her shoes, is whatever works for that person who's doing it. But at the end of the day, it's got to be logical. Isn't that right?
Do you know the ending before you start? Do you know your last twist?
More so these days than I used to. I don't always know exactly who's doing it, and I kind of almost don't want to, because she doesn't know either. Mm-hmm. So I try to be a little bit where she is, although I'm a little bit ahead. I mean, I do plan what she's going to be going into for various scenes, and when I do research, like for sure, I knew in this new book, if you're going to come back, and this is the 25th, I wanted to do a couple of really important things. One, I wanted to write it as if no one's ever read one before. You don't have to think about the first 24. Frankly, I don't care if you ever read them, but read this one. The second thing is I wanted to show some things that could really be pertinent what ifs today. Like, what if with artificial intelligence, what kinds of things are people doing with it? What if Lucy got her hands on it? What might she do with it? Or what if Scarpetta's on a Doomsday Commission and I'd love to hear a dog in the background. So,
sorry.
It's okay, because I know your dogs. I see them on Twitter when you get 5 million likes every time you put a picture up there.
Yeah, they're cute.
But
not right now, but normally they're cute. Sorry about that.
That's okay. But also, what if there's a catastrophe in space and it's so weird? Look at what's going on out there these days, where you hear about debris about to hit the space station and how catastrophic these kinds of things can be. And they're going to be calamities up there. Where people go, there are calamities. And what would Scarpetta do if there were a disaster in orbit, in low Earth orbit, and she had to deal with remotely? And so I did want to put that in there, because I thought, I just got to tie it in with everything else, though. It can't just be stuck in there. But that's the fun. You get your toys and you play with them.
I mean, just if someone told you 31 years ago, when Postmortem came out, that 31 years later you would be doing NASA and Doomsday Conspiracy and got out in space and still, the character would still be this popular, this huge, what would you have told yourself? What would you have said if I had told you that 31 years ago? I would have
thought that was crazy, and it would have scared me to death. I think it's better sometimes not to know what's ahead, because I honestly didn't have any pressure on me in the beginning. I mean, it was doomed for failure from day one. As 6,000 first printing and no marketing, no advertising, and the first review was absolutely dreadful. I thought, oh well, you better don't get rid of the job you now have at the morgue, even though that's not what you signed up to do in life. So no, I wouldn't have believed it, and I think and look, you and I both have all kinds of writers who ask us questions and wonder how to do things, and one thing I think is very important is no matter how successful you may be or how lucky you may be, always work as if it's not true.
Right.
Always think of what it felt like in those first days when you're scared and insecure about it, and giving it absolutely everything you've got, because it's always going to take that from you if it's going to work. Don't you think that's?
In fact, I want to ask you about that. I think that most writers that I know are ravaged by certain sorts of insecurity, believing we're not any good. I always say only bad writers think they're good. We all have imposter syndrome to some degree. We all have the insecurity. Do you have all that still? Do you still have that too?
I'd have all that even if I wasn't a messed up writer.
There's something there, right? There's something there, that idea that if we're self-satisfied, it's not going to be any good, right?
No, listen, storytellers are a special breed of person, and a storyteller can be many things. It can be a painter, a poet, a crime writer, anything where you're communicating something. You're, in mission control in NASA, you better get that story right, because someone's listening to you when they're getting ready to use that tool out there on a spacewalk. And you'll be writing about that next, because you're going to get all this.
Oh, God.
Watch, I'll go up in the zero G gravity plane with you, and we'll do the weightless thing. But it's whoever it is, we're all storytellers. We really are. And I encourage it with people. But the thing is, you're not going to be good at it unless you work hard at it. And you really won't be good at it unless you're bad at it first. And you'll be bad at it again, too. That's the way it works. And yes, it's insecure. Because, too, have you ever had to, I think that you're more, I understand you can write in a lot of different environments. You multitasker better than I am, but then you played basketball, and I just hit one little ball back and forth and didn't have to worry about all these people chasing me everywhere. So, but, I think that the most important thing is that everybody should be encouraged to try to do the best they can. And if you feel like you want to tell stories, it picks you more than you pick it. If you've always felt that compulsion ever since you can remember, if you're writing something in class or once upon a time, drawing pictures, then, that's something to pay attention to.
I know we had this conversation once before privately, but we talked about where we worked, and you mentioned I work every place. That's one of the things that changed a little bit with the pandemic. But I work in coffee shops and libraries. I've worked, the back of an Uber. Anything that works, it works for me. It's like riding a horse until the horse drops dead, and then I look for a new horse. How do you do it? Tell the people how you.
Well, you can sort of see from behind me. I go into my own little space. I really have to have more quiet. In fact, this room I'm in right now is soundproofed. It is soundproof because we're very close to some noisy areas, and if I'm trying to work, I can't tune it out. It's just the way I'm wired. It's got nothing to do whether it's better or worse. However, I know other people that write in Starbucks and write beautiful things in Starbucks, and I can hole up in here all day long and not even hear the wind blowing and not get anything done. So, but I do require a little more quiet, and some of it is probably a throwback to, I started out in nonfiction. So my first book, a biography, I'm surrounded by research materials. And so that's kind of hard to be, it's not very transportable. Like, say, with the Jack the Ripper book, you can imagine I had a whole room full of stuff. With Scarpetta, not as much anymore because I know a lot. I've been doing this for a long time. I have notebooks. I have a lot of my stuff is electronic, probably yours is too, that I can just look something up. I don't have to have 20,000 books lying around. But it is all about what works for the artist.
What works? Give me an idea of your work then, if you don't mind. Are you one who has to be at the desk every morning at 8 a.m. and you stop at 11 a.m. and then you take or are you less structured? Are you more structured? How do you do it?
I would say I'm less structured and a little bit more obsessive. My favorite thing is to start as early in the morning. I mean, if I can get into my chair when I've not been talking very much with anybody or doing anything and the world's not quite turned on yet, my characters are louder. I hear them and they work, and it just works better. It's like my battery starts draining, like on your cell phone. The more I do other things before I sit at my desk. So early morning, and on a good day, I pretty much will work most of the day. I stay in here. I might go for a walk and then come back and do some more. And then, and there are times when I've actually will sleep in my office. And because I'm so in the throes of it that I'll fall asleep, I get up and I do it again. I can't do that for long, but it might last for 10 days. And it's just a weird thing with me. I compare it to, it's whatever transports you into space.
So back up, you actually sleep in your office some days.
Sometimes this office has a bedroom. So it's just a condo really, an apartment. And that's down the hall from where we live. And so I can do that if I need to. And if Stacy's out of town, I just live down here.
Right.
And just work. And, part of it, when I was a little kid, this was the way I escaped from things. I escaped through my creativity. So I think some of this is a learned behavior that goes back a long, long time ago. May not be the best thing, but it's just sort of what I've always done is I like to just immerse myself and stay there. I wish I could do it in a more regular fashion, like, at 4:00 and don't think about it anymore, get up the next day, just do it. But it sort of takes me over. You've said it too. You said sometimes that you almost feel like you can't stop writing.
Right. Those are the best moments at the end, especially toward the end of a book. I might be in this room. I don't leave for hours on end. The kids throw me a banana and run away because they're scared of me. I grow a playoff beard.
Okay, I feel better now. I
wear the same socks. It's like an athlete. I grow a playoff beard. I have the same socks on. No, that's actually, I think, the best part of writing is when you can be that immersed in your story and it starts flowing, and it's a hard place to reach and stay at. But what I've also found, I'm curious, so there's days that I'm writing and I think, oh my God, this is so horrible. Every word is a case of mental constipation that would kill a horse. Every word's a struggle. It's just terrible. And then there's days when, the muse is sitting on your shoulder and she's singing angelically. But when I look at the book now, I can't remember what days were what. And that with fixing it and rewriting, you don't really even know. Do you agree with that?
I do. You don't remember the 9 months with the baby being born. You don't remember anything you went through. And Stacy laughs at me because she's been through this 16, 17 times now. And she says, you say the same thing every time. You just don't ever remember it. And I said, well, if I ever remembered it, I probably would never do it again.
It's exactly the same with Anne. She's always like, I can't. They start going like this, right? Or you're at that point in the book where you think it'll never work. You're at that point in the book where you think it's terrible and you've lost it. You're at that point in the book where you think this is great and your other stuff is crap. We go through all those stages, don't we? We sure do. We go through them over and over again. And I find myself saying the same things over and over again about the process. But it's very difficult creating something out of nothing. And to me, it's the equivalent of composing a symphony. And because you're the director, you're all the instruments, you're the singer, and you're the audience. You're everything. If you do this, and it's a huge honor and a tremendous responsibility. Flannery O'Connor said, "I don't love writing. I love having written." And when she would get into the editing process, she said it was like eating a horse blanket, and we know what that's like. This is not. It chooses you. And why is it important? Because without the storytellers, we
do not have anybody holding torches and lighting our way. We don't know who we are, what we've been, what we can be, what we should be. We don't know anything. And
this is what's so comforting. This is what's so comforting for me to hear, and I think for people who are listening to hear, is just, you think, well, you're Patricia Cornwell. You've written 20-something books and you've sold zillions of copies, and now you must have complete confidence, and it must be easier. And we go through the same angst and all of that. That really I think when you start to stop doing that, when it becomes easier, that's when you're starting to lose it. Do you agree with that?
It could be. Yeah. I know it's never gotten easier for me. I've just gotten a little smarter about how to do it, and I've learned to just be a little bit more thoughtful about moving forward. I think it's easy as an author when you really get going sometimes to keep going and going and going when you really should stop. Because I've learned to listen if there's a little part of me that goes, this is going to be a tough thing to tie together later, but I don't care if that guy was spying on her behind the wall. What are you going to do with that later? And then you leave it, and sure enough, it's a problem later, and you're trying to fix it. All of this may be sounding tedious to people, but to say that no matter how creative you may be, you don't have a beautiful body unless there's a skeleton inside that's holding it up and makes it work right. So make sure that you are structuring things properly. And if you don't know the answer, go find it out. And if you still don't know, then go back to where it was still working and pick up from there. That is what I do. And to me, that's the only cure for that horrible thing that people call writer's block. Anything that blocks you creatively, whether you're a scientist or a painter or a poet. And go do something that opens up go for a walk on the countryside. It doesn't have to be go to NASA. You don't have to fly a helicopter. Go walk in your own backyard and look at a tree differently, or watch the animals doing something, anything, or go do something that makes you think about something you've never thought about before. And then go back to where it was working. And it makes you be patient, or it has its way with you.
It's funny. I was talking recently with Lee Child about, doing one of these sort of things with Lee. And we were talking about, as we've gotten a little older, that maybe we don't have the stamina that, writing as long as we used to at one sitting. Do you find that your stamina is not the same as when you were starting out, or is it the same?
No, it's not the same.
It's different, right? You're smart, but you're smarter, right? About it, we are a little smarter. I mean, like I always say, every time I start a new book, those same voices, the same conversation you're having with Stacy, and the same conversation I'm having with Anne, we have it every time. But a little part of me says, I know I'm going to get past it now. I go through all those stages, but I know it's going to be okay. Do you have any of that, do you think, or is it just all each time it's fresh hell?
I think I go through the same stuff every single time. It's sometimes it's worse than others, and some books are harder than others, and especially when you're on deadlines. Right. And if you're a thriller writer, and I mean, literally, I've written almost one book a year if you average it out since I was a senior in college, which is why when I quit 5 years ago, I said I'm not even writing another book. I don't want to write any more books. But guess what? The books in Scarpetta had a different idea, because they said, hey, we're not done with you yet. And listen, I don't want it ever to be done with me, but I would encourage everybody, if something, you can love something like Roger Federer loves to hit that tennis ball. You can tell by watching him, but that guy works harder at that than anybody would imagine. He's an engineer, fine-tuning every little nuance that's going to make a difference out on that court. And that is what we should do. As authors, as artists, make sure you keep working on it.
Well, we're both good friends and love Billie Jean King, who we know still the smile on her face when she's hitting a tennis ball is unique. I mean, it's something that I don't, she may try to escape it, although I don't think anymore she does, but you can't, right? I mean, that's what we love. All right, I got to change to a couple of questions that have come in from our viewers. Thank you very much for sending some of these questions. Because time is running low, and Patricia and I know we can just do this all night, going back and forth, discussing this stuff. But here we go. In the description of Autopsy, I see that Scarpetta is part of the Doomsday Commission. Can you explain what this is? Do you want to give a little brief thing? Because this is something that's a little different for you in this book.
Yep, the Doomsday Commission is a national appointment that she and Benton Wesley have. It's a group of experts, top secret, that meet at the Pentagon or the White House or various places to talk about basically international and actually international threats. The sorts of things that you would imagine that are going on when you have the Russians and the Chinese and the space race that we've got, and you have a pandemic where some people think that the virus was created in a lab, and all the things that you might imagine that she could get pulled into. And so she is on this Doomsday Commission, and she's in the midst of a serial murder case in Old Town Alexandria, where she's moved, and we relaunched the series there, and she gets called. She and Benton get called to the White House, and because there appears to be a disaster in space that might involve casualties. This has never happened before, and they need her to help sort through it. So in a nutshell, that's what that is. And the Doomsday Commission is something she'll continue to be part of. Her expertise could be demanded anywhere, and including anywhere around the world. And in this day and age, the beauty of it is a lot of the stuff you can do remotely, like her dealing with the catastrophe in space. She deals with it 100% remotely.
That's really kind of a cool scene. That's I think it's a really cool scene that people are really going to love. And the other thing that someone's asking about that I love that they're asking, and I always love this kind of question. I know the answer, but you have to answer it. Will we see Marino back in Autopsy?
Oh, yes. Marino is up close and personal. As a matter of fact, what I've done is I moved everybody back to Virginia. Benton and Scarpetta living on an old estate, this old rundown place that they got that goes back to George Washington practically. And Lucy's in the guest house, and she's gone through an interesting personal situation and is also deep into artificial intelligence, and that's as much as I'm going to tell you about that. Marino is right around the corner within walking distance, and you'll find out soon enough that he has gotten hooked up with Scarpetta's sister, Dorothy. So all of the usual suspects are right on top of each other, and that makes for a lovely poisonous stew, and a fun one too.
Well, this is important because you and I are talking about process, and we're talking about, how cutting edge you were in terms of forensics and the science. But in my view, the books would not work if the fact that we didn't want to spend time with Scarpetta and Benton and Marino and the rest of the gang. That's really why we read the books, don't you think, in the end of the day? Yeah, we love the science and stuff like that, but it's like having a great, you were mentioning skeleton, but it's like having a great car. If the car doesn't have any petrol or any fuel, it's not going to go anyplace. Do you agree with that?
It's just not interesting. Yeah. You want to see what Jack Reacher's going to do next, the character. You want to see in your work, the guy taking the shower on the plane and where he's headed off to, and you want to care about any of these people that we put out there. And if you don't care about it, I don't see why people keep reading. Do you?
Yeah, I don't. All right, I got time for one more question because we're starting to run low on time, so I'm going to ask it. This is also from one of you guys out there. Thank you. Because I was going to ask this one anyway. This is a good one. I know the answer, but again, were you writing this book during the pandemic? If so, did it affect your writing? Was it cathartic, or did you find it more difficult to write during the pandemic?
I did write this book during the pandemic, and that's why I decided to do it. I had the whole world turned upside down. And sometimes when you make one decision, it changes when things are so dramatically different. And because I wasn't going anywhere, it actually made it easier because I just went to my office every day. Stacy and I were living, very much sheltered in place like so many people during the worst of all this. And it also gave me an opportunity to put Scarpetta in the same thing. The pandemic has been an issue for what's going on with them, as you'll find out if you read the book. If people read it, they're living in the same world we're in right now, really, because I wrote it as if it opens on November 30th and literally November 30th of this year. And they're, for the most part, what I describe is pretty much the same now, except that Robert E. Lee's statue in Richmond has been torn down since I wrote the book. So
it's actually made, this is one of these other things that we did differently. I'd be afraid, or I was afraid. I was writing a book during the pandemic, and I moved the book to 2019 just so I wouldn't have to deal with it. But I admire the fact that in the middle of it, you took it head on. Because I'm not much with science, I was nervous I would get it all wrong in terms of, okay, I'm writing it now, but the book won't come out for 8 or 9 months, and by then everything may have changed. So I'm going to ask you one last question, but one more thing. One of the things that you and I also are very different on, as you know, is I'm a lazy researcher. But I contend that it's not that you're a great researcher, which you are, but that you love research. I mean, that you love doing all these things, or not.
Though. Here's the whole point. A lot of people don't have to do some of the research I do because they already know things. Not
me, but go ahead, others.
No, listen. When I got into Davidson to play tennis for them, because my SAT scores were so bad, I won't even tell you what they are. But Marino's bowling score is higher than my SAT. And when I got to Davidson, I had this little necklace that was just this little square rectangle of gold. This cheap little thing. And I didn't get anything engraved on it because I decided this is my tabula rasa, my blank slate, because you are a blank slate between the ears. You don't know anything about except hitting a tennis ball. And so, I do research because I write about people that I don't know what they do. I don't know what a forensic pathologist or cops. When I got the cop beat, I would ride around with the police officers and try to learn what they were doing. And I am curious, but to me, it's exploring. And it's you, Harlan, might go for a walk and explore something in New Jersey or New York, and you get an idea that is just as valuable as the one I got when I went to the morgue and had to smell all that nasty stuff in there. So it's all about the person and what they're doing, but it's what works for you.
By the way, I remember I sent you a picture. When my kids were looking at colleges, we went down to Davidson, and in the admissions office, they have a whole collection of your books. So I was sitting there going, oh, look, it's... We authors do that sort of stupid things. I took a picture and sent it to you. All right. Guys, how exciting. 5 years later, Scarpetta is back and better than ever, as they say. And I love you had the White House on here. It's a book with it's a great book. It's one of your best, I think.
Thank you.
And as someone who's
thank you for doing this.
Been reading you for over 30 years, and so enjoy it, guys. Thank you, Patricia, for taking the time out to talk with me. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for supporting independent bookstores and the bookstore. This is one bookstore that means a lot to both of us. So we're glad you're here, and we're glad to be here talking about it. And I hope to see you guys soon. Thanks, Patricia.
Thank you, Harlan.